Before we begin, make sure to subscribe for more thrilling love stories filled with danger, passion, and unforgettable twists. The night Isabella Romano walked into Valentino De Luca's private club, every conversation in the room faded into a cautious hush. The air inside the sovereign was thick with cigar smoke, crystal laughter, and quiet fear. Everyone in the city knew the name Valentino De Luca. Some called him the Mafia King. Others called him the devil in a tailored suit. He owned half the skyline, controlled the docks, and had judges and senators answering his calls before their own wives did. But tonight, as he stood on the balcony overlooking the velvet-draped lounge below, there was only one person who held his attention. Isabella Romano. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't dressed like the women who usually filled his club either. No shimmering gold dress, no calculated smile. Instead, she wore a simple black gown, elegant and sharp, her dark hair falling freely over her shoulders. She walked with confidence, not arrogance, with purpose, not fear. And that was the first thing that unsettled him. Valentino watched as she approached the bar, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. The men nearby instinctively stepped aside. Fear was contagious in his world, and it spread quickly. But Isabella didn't seem infected. She ordered sparkling water instead of champagne, another small rebellion. Valentino's lips curved slightly. Interesting. He descended the curved staircase slowly, his polished shoes echoing against marble. Conversations resumed, but in whispers. His presence changed the temperature of the room. People adjusted their behavior around him like planets around the sun. He stopped a few feet behind her. "You're in the wrong place," he said calmly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Isabella didn't turn immediately. She took a slow sip of her drink before finally facing him. Up close, her eyes were striking, deep hazel with flecks of gold that reflected the chandelier light. She studied him, not with admiration, not with terror, but with quiet assessment. "I don't think so," she replied evenly. A few nearby guests stiffened. No one spoke to Valentino De Luca like that. His jaw tightened just slightly, though his expression remained composed. "Everyone here knows who I am." "I know exactly who you are," she said, no tremor in her voice, no hesitation. That was when he stepped closer, closing the space between them until only inches separated them. The scent of his cologne, clean, expensive, dangerous, wrapped around her. Most people would have backed away. Isabella didn't. Valentino tilted his head slightly, studying her like a puzzle. "Do I scare you?" The Mafia King whispered. It wasn't a threat. It was a genuine question. The room seemed to freeze. Even the bartender paused mid-polish. Isabella held his gaze steadily, her heartbeat pounding but hidden beneath steady breathing. "Should you?" she asked quietly. The answer wasn't defiance. It was something far more powerful, curiosity. Valentino blinked once, surprised despite himself. In his entire empire of power and influence, fear was currency. He inspired it effortlessly. It protected him, shielded him, defined him. Yet this woman stood before him, neither impressed nor intimidated. "People who aren't afraid," he said slowly, "usually end up regretting it." Isabella's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Or maybe they're just not impressed by power." A low murmur rippled across the room. Valentino felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. It wasn't anger. It wasn't attraction. It was intrigue, dangerous intrigue. "Who are you?" he asked. "Isabella Romano." The name landed between them like a loaded weapon. Valentino's eyes darkened. Romano, he knew that name, an old family once connected to his operations decades ago, loyal once. Then vanished after a scandal no one discussed openly. "Romano," he repeated, voice quieter now. "That's not a coincidence." "No," she agreed, "it's not." He motioned subtly, and the club manager quickly cleared a private lounge area for them. Valentino gestured for Isabella to sit. She did, crossing her legs gracefully. He remained standing for a moment, studying her under the dim golden lighting. "Your family disappeared 20 years ago," he said calmly. "My father didn't disappear," Isabella replied. "He was forced out." Valentino's eyes narrowed slightly. "That's a bold accusation." "It's a truthful one." She leaned forward slightly, her voice lowering. "You built an empire, Mr. De Luca, but empires are built on foundations. I'm here to talk about mine." He sat down slowly across from her. For the first time in years, Valentino felt like he wasn't controlling the conversation. She wasn't here by accident. She wasn't reckless. She was deliberate. "You walked into my territory alone," he said quietly. "That's either bravery or stupidity." "Maybe it's neither," she replied. Maybe I just know you won't hurt me. A flicker of something crossed his face. And why would you assume that? Because if you wanted me gone, I wouldn't have made it past the door. Silence stretched between them, heavy but electric. Valentino couldn't deny the truth in her words. If she were a threat, she wouldn't be sitting here breathing. Yet something about her presence felt like a shift in gravity. What do you want? He asked finally. Isabella's gaze softened, but not with weakness, with resolve. The truth, she said. About what happened to my father, about why the Romano name was erased. Valentino leaned back slightly, fingers steepled. The past was a territory he rarely revisited. The past, he said evenly, is buried for a reason. Not for me, she answered. For me, it's unfinished. Her courage wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was steady. And that unsettled him more than open rebellion ever could. Valentino studied her carefully. If she was lying, she was exceptionally good. If she was telling the truth, then someone had hidden something from him years ago, and he didn't tolerate secrets within his empire. You're playing a dangerous game, Isabella, he warned. You came into my world asking questions that powerful people don't like answered. She didn't look away. Maybe I'm not afraid of powerful people. He stood slowly, circling around her chair. Everyone is afraid of something. He stopped just behind her, leaning slightly closer. The question is, what are you afraid of? Isabella inhaled quietly, steadying herself before answering. Lies, she said softly. I'm afraid of living in a lie. Valentino straightened, studying her profile. No tremble, no deception in her tone, just conviction. For a man who ruled through certainty and control, uncertainty was the one thing he despised. And Isabella Romano had just become the biggest uncertainty of his life. He moved back in front of her, his expression unreadable. If I agree to look into your father's past, he said slowly, you stay under my protection, you don't make moves without my knowledge, you don't speak to anyone without my approval. Isabella tilted her head slightly. Protection or surveillance? A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. In my world, they're the same thing. She considered his offer carefully. Then she stood, meeting him eye to eye once more. Fine, she said calmly. But understand something, Mr. De Luca. His brow lifted slightly. I'm not here to be saved. Their eyes locked in a silent battle neither fully understood yet. Valentino felt something shift inside him again, something that had nothing to do with power. Good, he said quietly, because I don't save people. And as the chandelier lights shimmered above them and the city pulsed outside the club walls, neither of them realized that this simple conversation, this one question, this one fearless answer, had just begun a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. The following morning, Isabella woke to the unfamiliar stillness of a place that was too large to feel like home. The guest suite inside Valentino De Luca's private estate overlooked the city skyline, floor-to-ceiling windows revealing steel towers and moving traffic far below. She had agreed to his terms the night before, but seeing the reality of it in daylight made everything feel heavier. Protection, he had called it. Surveillance, she had corrected. Either way, she was now inside the lion's den. A soft knock came at the door before a housekeeper entered with breakfast. The staff moved respectfully, carefully, as if the walls themselves reported back to Valentino. Isabella thanked the woman politely and waited until she was alone again before walking toward the window. Somewhere in this city was the truth about her father's downfall, and somewhere inside this estate was the man who might be hiding it or uncovering it. Across the property, in a sunlit office lined with dark oak shelves and discreet security screens, Valentino studied a thin file placed in front of him. Romano. The name felt like an echo from another era. He had been younger when the Romani family faded from the business world. His father had been alive then, still ruling with old-world discipline and sharp instincts. Valentino remembered whispers of financial betrayal, missing funds, alliances broken overnight. But he also remembered that his father had rarely tolerated disloyalty. If Isabella's father had crossed a line, consequences would have followed swiftly. Yet something about the records unsettled him now. The paperwork from that time was thinner than it should have been. Entire months summarized in 2 pages. Transactions redirected through shell corporations that no longer existed. It wasn't clean. And Valentino prided himself on clean power. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Luca Morti, his most trusted advisor since childhood, stepped inside. You've taken a personal interest in this one, Luca said carefully. Valentino didn't look up immediately. It concerns unfinished business. Luca nodded but didn't appear convinced. The Romano situation was handled years ago. Reopening it might stir things. Valentino closed the file slowly. Then let them stir. His voice was calm but decisive. Find out who oversaw the final audit before Romano was forced out. I want names. Luca hesitated for only a second before nodding again. Understood. When the door closed, Valentino leaned back in his chair. He wasn't sure whether he was investigating for Isabella or for himself. Meanwhile, Isabella explored the estate with measured steps. The house was elegant but controlled, every hallway monitored discreetly. She wasn't naive. She knew she was being watched. But she also knew something Valentino might not expect. She had come prepared. Before arriving at the club the previous night, she had memorized dates, transactions, and old newspaper clippings tied to her father's case. She had grown up in exile from wealth, watching her once respected father shrink into silence. He had never explained what truly happened, only insisting that powerful men rewrote stories when it suited them. Now, she intended to read the original draft. Late that afternoon, Valentino summoned her to his office. She entered calmly, refusing to show how aware she was of the guards stationed at discreet intervals. He stood near the window, hands in his pockets, suit jacket removed but authority intact. "You slept well?" he asked without turning. "Well enough," she replied, "for someone under surveillance." He glanced over his shoulder, faint amusement flickering across his expression. "You're safe here." Isabella crossed her arms lightly. "Safe and free aren't always the same." Valentino faced her fully then. "You agreed to my terms." "I did. That doesn't mean I trust them." The honesty in her voice struck him more sharply than accusation would have. Walked toward his desk and picked up the file. "Your father's exit from the business world was documented as financial misconduct, missing capital from joint ventures tied to port shipments." Isabella's jaw tightened. "He never stole anything." Valentino studied her reaction closely. There was anger there, yes, but not panic, not guilt. "The records from that period are incomplete," he admitted, "which means either someone erased something or your father was more careful than anyone realized." Isabella stepped closer. "You think he betrayed your family?" "I think," Valentino said evenly, "that the truth is buried under layers of loyalty and fear." He paused. "And I don't like buried things." For a moment, silence stretched between them again, but this time it felt less hostile and more aligned. "If someone manipulated the accounts," Isabella said carefully, "they would have needed access at the highest level." Valentino's eyes darkened thoughtfully. She wasn't wrong. Few people had that kind of authority 20 years ago. Fewer still remained alive or influential today. "You're suggesting an internal betrayal," he said quietly. "I'm suggesting my father was framed." Valentino considered the possibility. If that were true, then his father had punished the wrong man. And that meant someone else had benefited. A discreet chime sounded from Valentino's desk. He glanced at the screen briefly before his expression shifted. "There's been movement at the docks," he said calmly. "An unauthorized shipment flagged under an old corporate alias." Isabella's pulse quickened. "Romano Shipping?" she asked. Valentino looked at her sharply. "How do you know that name?" "Because it was the company my father built before everything collapsed." Valentino grabbed his jacket. "You're staying here," he said firmly. "Absolutely not," Isabella shot back. "If this connects to my father, I'm coming." His tone hardened. "This isn't a negotiation." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You asked what I was afraid of. I'm afraid of staying silent while someone else controls my story." Their eyes locked again, tension rising. But this time it wasn't only emotional, it was strategic. Valentino weighed the risk quickly. Taking her would expose her to danger. Leaving her behind would likely push her to act independently, and that was far riskier. Finally, he exhaled slowly. "You stay in the car. You follow instructions immediately. No heroics." Isabella nodded once. "Deal." Within minutes, they were descending into the underground garage. The ride to the docks was quiet but charged. Streetlights blurred past as the city shifted into evening. Isabella watched Valentino from the corner of her eye. He was composed, focused, every movement precise. Power radiated from him effortlessly. But tonight, beneath that control, she sensed something else, doubt. When they arrived at the docks, the air was cool and salty. Cargo containers loomed like steel giants under harsh floodlights. Valentino's men moved quickly, surrounding a particular shipment marked with a faded emblem Isabella recognized instantly. Her breath caught. "That's it," she whispered. Valentino stepped forward, signaling for the container to be opened. The heavy doors creaked apart slowly. Inside were crates labeled under a different corporation, but beneath the stickers, Isabella could see her father's original insignia, partially scraped away but still visible. Valentino's jaw tightened. "Someone revived the old alias," he murmured, "and they didn't bother hiding it well." Isabella stepped closer despite instructions. "Or they wanted it found." He glanced at her sharply. She continued, voice steady. "If someone framed my father back then, reviving his company now could shift suspicion again, or send a message." Valentino's mind raced through possibilities. Only someone deeply familiar with the old structure would know how to manipulate those records, and bold enough to risk drawing his attention. He turned to Luca. "Trace the shipment origin, quietly." Then he looked back at Isabella. Under the floodlights, determination sharpened her features. She wasn't intimidated by the industrial setting, by the armed guards, or by him. And that realization stirred something complicated inside him again. "This changes things," he said quietly. "Yes," she replied, "it does." Valentino met her gaze, voice lowering slightly. "You asked me last night if you should be afraid of me." Isabella held his stare. "Yes." The wind shifted around them as tension coiled tighter. Valentino stepped closer, his tone no longer teasing but serious. "You shouldn't be afraid of me," he said. "You should be afraid of whoever wants this past uncovered." And as the container doors slammed shut behind them, both of them understood that the question between them was no longer about fear. It was about who had been powerful enough to rewrite history, and who was desperate enough to rewrite it again. The docks incident changed the atmosphere between them in ways neither of them openly acknowledged. By the time Valentino's convoy returned to the estate, the city was wrapped in midnight silence, but Isabella's mind refused to rest. The image of her father's faded insignia scratched beneath those false labels replayed over and over in her thoughts. Someone had revived Romano shipping intentionally. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't nostalgia. It was strategy. And strategy meant intelligence. Valentino, on the other hand, was unusually quiet during the drive back. His world was built on control, on knowing every transaction, every alliance, every threat before it materialized. The fact that an old alias connected to a decades-old scandal had resurfaced without his knowledge unsettled him more than he would ever admit aloud. Inside his private office, security footage from the docks played silently on multiple screens. Luca stood nearby, arms crossed. "The shipment originated from a holding company registered 3 months ago," Luca reported. "Board members are ghosts, fabricated identities." Valentino's gaze remained fixed on the paused frame showing the Romano insignia. "No one revives a dead name without expecting a reaction," he said calmly. "They wanted me to see it." Luca studied him carefully. Or they wanted her to see it. Valentino's jaw tightened slightly. That possibility had already crossed his mind. If Isabella was being used as leverage, then bringing her into his protection had accelerated someone else's plan. "Dig deeper," Valentino ordered. "Financial trails, offshore accounts, anything tied to executives from 20 years ago. I want overlap." Luca nodded and left without further comment. Isabella stood alone on the terrace outside her suite, the night wind cool against her skin. She felt closer to the truth than ever before, yet the path ahead felt more dangerous than she had anticipated. She had expected resistance, suspicion, perhaps even dismissal. She hadn't expected proof so quickly. The revived shipment meant her father's name hadn't been erased. It had been preserved quietly, like a weapon stored for later use. Footsteps approached behind her, steady and unhurried. She didn't turn immediately. "You don't sleep much, do you?" Valentino's voice carried a hint of dry observation. "Not when answers are close," she replied. He stepped beside her, resting his hands lightly on the stone railing, the city lights reflected in his dark eyes. "This isn't coincidence," he said. "Someone is manipulating old structures." Isabella finally faced him. "Then you believe me." It wasn't triumph in her tone. It was relief. Valentino held her gaze. "I believe something doesn't add up." A pause lingered between them, charged but quieter than before. "You said earlier," she continued carefully, "that I should be afraid of whoever wants this uncovered." Valentino nodded once. "Yes. Do you think it's someone inside your organization?" she asked. The question wasn't accusatory, but it was bold. Valentino didn't answer immediately. Loyalty within his empire was built carefully, but time changed men. Ambition corrupted patience. "If it is," he said finally, "they've hidden it well." Isabella's expression softened slightly. "You don't like not knowing." A faint smirk touched his lips. "I don't like losing control." The honesty between them was becoming easier, and that realization unsettled them both in a different way. The following afternoon, new information arrived. Luca returned with a folder thicker than the previous file. "There's a connection," he announced. Valentino gestured for him to continue while Isabella remained seated across the desk, attentive. 20 years ago, during the Romano audit, a secondary financial advisor was involved. Not officially listed as lead auditor, but his digital signature appears on several internal transfers. Valentino's eyes sharpened. "Name?" "Adrian Keller." The name hung in the air like a low chord. Valentino recognized it immediately. Keller had once been an ambitious analyst under his father's leadership. After the Romano scandal, Keller had risen quickly, eventually managing several high-yield ventures before retiring quietly a decade later. "He benefited," Isabella murmured, connecting the dots instantly. "If my father was removed, someone had to step into that position." Luca nodded. Keller's assets increased significantly within 2 years of the Romano exit. Valentino leaned back slowly. "Where is he now?" "Officially retired, lives privately outside the city, minimal public presence." Isabella felt her pulse quicken. "We need to speak to him." Valentino's expression hardened. "If he orchestrated this, he won't confess easily." "Maybe not," she replied steadily, "but he might slip." Valentino studied her carefully. She wasn't asking recklessly, she was thinking strategically. That impressed him more than he expected. "You won't approach him alone," he said firmly. "I wouldn't expect to," she countered. Luca glanced between them, noting the subtle shift in their dynamic. There was still tension, but now it carried alignment instead of opposition. 2 evenings later, they drove to Keller's estate under the pretense of a social visit. The property was expansive but understated, wealth without ostentation. As their car rolled through the iron gates, Isabella felt a strange calm settle over her. This wasn't about confrontation anymore. It was about confirmation. Keller greeted them politely at the entrance, his silver hair neatly combed, his smile measured. "Valentino," he said smoothly. "To what do I owe this surprise?" His eyes shifted briefly to Isabella. Recognition flickered, subtle but unmistakable. Valentino noticed. "You remember the Romano family," Valentino stated casually. Keller's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "That was a long time ago." Isabella stepped forward before Valentino could speak again. "Some things don't stay buried," she said calmly. They were invited into a sitting room filled with antique furniture and framed awards. Conversation began lightly, but tension coiled beneath every word. Valentino watched Keller closely, analyzing micro-expressions, tone shifts, breathing patterns. Isabella did the same. When the revived shipment was mentioned, Keller's composure faltered for a fraction of a second, barely noticeable but enough. "Strange coincidence," Keller said lightly. "Old companies resurface all the time." Isabella leaned forward slightly, not when their founders were accused of theft. Silence fell heavier this time. Keller's gaze settled on her fully. "Accusations are based on evidence. Evidence can be manufactured," she replied. Valentino decided to press harder. "Your signature appears on internal transfers from that audit period," he said evenly. Keller's fingers tightened around his glass. "I assisted where needed. You advanced quickly after Romano was removed." Valentino continued. Keller's calm exterior began to crack. "Opportunity presents itself in business." Isabella's voice lowered but sharpened. "Or opportunity is created." The room felt smaller suddenly. Keller stood abruptly, walking toward the window. "You're chasing ghosts," he said stiffly. "The past is settled." Valentino rose slowly as well. "The past," he said quietly, "is rarely as settled as people hope." Keller turned back, frustration flickering openly now. "If you're implying misconduct, you'll need more than insinuation." Valentino stepped closer, voice steady but firm. "We will have it." For the first time, uncertainty flashed in Keller's eyes. It wasn't fear yet, but it was awareness. Awareness that his past might not remain buried. Isabella studied him carefully. She saw not a mastermind, but a man who had once gambled and won. The question now was whether he had acted alone or on behalf of someone more powerful. As they prepared to leave, Keller's final words followed them to the door. "Be careful reopening old wounds," he warned. "Some scars protect more than they reveal." Outside, the evening air felt sharper. Isabella exhaled slowly. "He knows," she said. Valentino nodded once. "Yes, but he's not the top," she added thoughtfully. Valentino looked at her, impressed by the speed of her deduction. "No," he agreed. "He is." They stood beside the car for a moment, tension blending with something quieter, trust beginning to form. "You didn't flinch in there," Valentino observed. Isabella met his gaze steadily. "Neither did you." A faint, almost reluctant smile touched his lips. "You asked if you should be afraid of me," he said softly. "Are you?" Isabella held his eyes, the night wind catching her hair. "No," she answered honestly. And this time, Valentino realized the truth in her voice didn't weaken him. It strengthened something he hadn't expected to feel. But as the car pulled away from Keller's estate, neither of them noticed the black sedan parked discreetly down the road, its engine humming quietly, its driver watching them leave. The game wasn't just reopening. It was escalating. The black sedan that had been parked down the road did not follow immediately, which made it more dangerous. Valentino noticed it only after they had driven several blocks away, his instincts sharpening as he checked the rearview mirror for the third time. The car kept a calculated distance, neither too close nor too far, professional enough to avoid suspicion from anyone but him. Isabella sensed the shift in his posture. "We're not alone, are we?" she asked quietly. Valentino didn't look at her. "Stay calm." His driver adjusted routes smoothly, taking a longer turn through a commercial district instead of heading straight back to the estate. The sedan mirrored them 2 streets behind. Confirmation. Valentino's jaw tightened. Keller hadn't panicked enough to expose himself, but someone else clearly felt threatened. "Call it in," he told Luca through a secure line. Within minutes, 2 additional vehicles from Valentino's security team appeared, subtly repositioning around them. The sedan hesitated, then slowed, eventually disappearing into side traffic. Whoever was inside had sent a message without confrontation. They were being watched. Back at the estate, security protocols tightened immediately. Guards doubled at the gates. Surveillance feeds expanded. Isabella stood inside Valentino's office as instructions were issued rapidly. The controlled calm of the house shifted into silent readiness. When the room finally cleared, leaving only the 2 of them, the tension that remained was heavier than before. "This confirms it," Isabella said softly. "We're getting close." Valentino nodded once. "Or stepping into something bigger than we expected." He walked toward the liquor cabinet but stopped halfway, reconsidering. Clarity mattered now. "Keller isn't acting alone," he said. "He's too careful, too polished. Someone with deeper roots protected him 20 years ago." Isabella crossed her arms lightly, thinking, "Your father." The name lingered between them. Valentino's expression hardened slightly, but not with anger, more with reflection. "My father ruled differently," he said slowly. "He valued loyalty above all else." "And if someone convinced him my father betrayed that loyalty?" she pressed. Valentino's silence was answer enough. Later that night, Isabella couldn't sleep again. The black sedan replayed in her mind. She stepped quietly into the library, hoping distraction might calm her thoughts. Instead, she found Valentino already there, reviewing documents under a dim lamp. He looked up briefly. "You're starting to make a habit of this," he observed. "So are you," she replied. There was less edge in their voices now. Shared danger had softened something between them, though neither named it. Isabella approached the table, scanning the papers. "Anything new?" Valentino slid a photograph toward her. It was older, grainy, taken at what looked like a formal gala decades ago. In the image stood Valentino's father, Adrian Keller, and another man Isabella didn't recognize. "Who's that?" she asked. Valentino's gaze lingered on the third figure. "Marco DeSantis, my father's closest advisor at the time." Isabella studied the image more carefully. "Where is he now?" "Disappeared from public life shortly after Keller retired." Valentino's voice lowered slightly. "But unlike Keller, DeSantis didn't gain wealth. He gained influence." The realization formed slowly but clearly. "If DeSantis convinced your father that mine betrayed the organization," Isabella said, "he could remove a rival and elevate Keller to handle the financial side. Keller benefits financially. DeSantis benefits strategically." Valentino leaned back, processing. It fit too cleanly to ignore. And if DeSantis is still active behind the scenes, he added, he may be orchestrating this revival to destabilize my authority. Isabella's pulse quickened. Then this isn't just about the past. No, Valentino agreed quietly. It's about control now. Their eyes met again, but this time there was no challenge in the gaze, only shared understanding. The next morning, a development accelerated everything. One of Valentino's shipping warehouses reported a system breach. Not physical, digital. Financial routing codes had been tampered with, redirecting minor funds to obscure accounts. Small enough to avoid immediate detection, large enough to signal capability. Luca stormed into the office with urgency rarely seen on his composed face. "This is deliberate," he said. "Someone is testing us." Valentino remained calm, though his eyes sharpened. "Trace the origin. It's masked, but the encryption resembles old frameworks used during your father's era." The implication was clear. Whoever was responsible had intimate knowledge of the organization's original architecture. Isabella stepped closer to the screen displaying the corrupted lines of code. "They're recreating patterns from 20 years ago," she said thoughtfully, "which means they want you to connect it to that period." Valentino looked at her carefully. "A distraction? Or a warning?" she replied. Silence followed. If DeSantis was behind this, he wasn't just protecting an old secret. He was challenging Valentino directly, testing his grip on the empire. By afternoon, another escalation arrived. A discreet envelope was delivered to the estate gates with no return address. Security scanned it thoroughly before bringing it inside. Valentino opened it personally while Isabella watched. Inside was a single sheet of paper. On it was printed an old newspaper headline from 20 years ago: "Romano executive under investigation for embezzlement." Beneath the headline, written in bold ink, were 3 words: "Some truths destroy." Isabella felt her throat tighten, but she forced herself to remain steady. Valentino's expression darkened, not with fear, but with resolve. "He's baiting us," she said quietly. Valentino folded the paper carefully. "Yes. Are we going to take it?" she asked. He looked at her fully now. "We already have." That evening, Valentino called for a private meeting with his inner circle. Isabella remained beside him, not hidden, not dismissed. The message was intentional. Loyalty was reaffirmed. Systems were reinforced. Investigations widened quietly toward DeSantis' known associates. The room pulsed with disciplined authority, but beneath it ran an undercurrent of something new. Valentino wasn't just defending his empire, he was correcting it. After the meeting, as the estate settled into guarded silence, Isabella stepped onto the balcony again. Valentino joined her moments later. The city lights stretched endlessly before them, unaware of the storm forming behind closed doors. "This could get worse," he said quietly. "I know," she answered. He turned slightly toward her. "If it does, I can still send you away." Isabella shook her head gently. "If I leave now, they win." A pause lingered before she added softly, "And I trust you." The words hung in the air, heavier than either expected. Valentino studied her profile, illuminated by city glow. Trust wasn't something he earned easily, nor something he received lightly. "You shouldn't trust me completely," he said, though there was no warning in his tone. "Maybe not," she admitted, "but I don't fear you." The statement felt different now, not defiant but intimate. Valentino stepped closer, the space between them narrowing. "That question," he murmured, recalling the night they met. "Do I scare you?" Isabella met his eyes steadily. "No," she said again, "but whoever is behind this, they should be afraid of us." A faint, genuine smile touched Valentino's lips for the first time since this began. For the first time, they weren't standing on opposite sides of a mystery. They were standing together against it. And somewhere beyond the city lights, Marco DeSantis was watching carefully, calculating his next move, unaware that the 2 people he intended to destabilize had just become far more dangerous as allies than they ever were apart. At the end of the week, the tension inside Valentino's empire was no longer subtle. It was strategic. Quiet audits were underway, digital firewalls rebuilt, loyalties tested without announcement. Marco DeSantis had not resurfaced publicly, but his shadow was beginning to stretch across every anomaly they uncovered. Small inconsistencies in long-forgotten contracts, retired executives suddenly transferring assets offshore, shell corporations blinking into existence and dissolving within months. It wasn't chaos, it was choreography, And Valentino understood one thing clearly now: this wasn't just about hiding a 20-year-old betrayal. It was about weakening him from within before striking openly. Isabella stood at the center of the storm with him, no longer as a guest under protection, but as a partner in strategy. The staff had noticed the shift. She was present in meetings. She asked precise questions. She listened more than she spoke. And when she did speak, it was with clarity that demanded attention. One evening, Luca entered Valentino's office with something different in his expression. Not urgency, not frustration, but confirmation. "We found him," Luca said quietly. Valentino looked up slowly. "DeSantis," Luca nodded. "He's been operating through a private investment consortium registered overseas, disguised ownership, layered proxies, but the signatures align." Isabella felt her pulse steady rather than spike. This was what she had come for: not confrontation, but proof. Valentino stood, walking toward the large digital board mounted against the wall. Files projected across it, timelines, transfers, faces, corporate links. At the center now glowed Marco DeSantis' image, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, calculated. "He never disappeared," Valentino murmured. "He repositioned." Isabella stepped closer to the screen. "If he framed my father, he needed your father's trust. That kind of influence doesn't vanish, it evolves." Valentino glanced at her. "You think this is personal?" She met his gaze steadily. "I think power rarely forgets unfinished business." As if summoned by their conclusions, another message arrived, but this time it wasn't subtle. One of Valentino's smaller distribution facilities was hit overnight. Not destroyed, not robbed, exposed. Anonymous tips led regulators to investigate minor licensing discrepancies. Legal, manageable issues, but embarrassing. Strategic damage. DeSantis wasn't attacking wealth. He was attacking reputation. "He wants you distracted," Isabella said calmly as reports came in. "Defending instead of advancing." Valentino nodded once. "Then we stop defending." Luca looked between them. "Meaning," Valentino's eyes sharpened, "we confront him directly." Isabella felt the weight of that decision settle in the room. "He'll expect aggression," she said carefully. "That's his language." Valentino's lips curved faintly. "Then we speak a different one." Within 48 hours, a formal invitation was delivered to DeSantis' consortium headquarters requesting a private negotiation regarding shared historical interests. It was bold, public enough to draw attention, controlled enough to avoid legal suspicion. DeSantis responded within hours, agreeing to meet at a neutral corporate venue downtown. The message was clear. He was confident. The morning of the meeting arrived crisp and quiet. Isabella stood in front of the mirror in her suite, adjusting the sleeve of her tailored ivory suit. She had chosen it deliberately, not soft, not aggressive, balanced. Valentino entered moments later, dressed in charcoal gray, composed as ever but with a sharper edge in his posture. "You don't have to attend," he reminded her, though the offer lacked conviction. Isabella turned to face him. "This started with my father. It ends with me present." He studied her for a long second before nodding. "Stay close." The conference room where they met DeSantis was sleek and modern, glass walls overlooking the skyline. Marco DeSantis stood as they entered, smiling politely as if greeting old acquaintances. "Valentino," he said smoothly, "it's been years." His eyes shifted to Isabella. "Miss Romano." The acknowledgement carried no surprise. Isabella met his gaze without hesitation. "Mr. DeSantis." They took their seats across from him, the polished table reflecting 3 controlled expressions. "You've been busy," Valentino began calmly. DeSantis chuckled lightly. "Business evolves." Isabella leaned forward slightly. "So does truth." A flicker of interest passed through DeSantis' eyes. Valentino placed a folder on the table and slid it forward. Inside were compiled records, financial overlaps between Keller's rise and DeSantis' influence, the revived Romano alias, the digital breach patterns tied to legacy systems. DeSantis skimmed the top page without visible concern. "Circumstantial," he said smoothly. "Patterns are not proof." Isabella's voice remained steady. "But patterns reveal intention." DeSantis leaned back comfortably. "Intention is subjective." Valentino folded his hands calmly. "Destabilizing my operations is." Silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable for DeSantis. He thrived in tension. "You're a capable leader, Valentino," DeSantis said thoughtfully. "But your father trusted instinct over sentiment. That's how he built stability." The implication hung in the air. Isabella felt it instantly. DeSantis saw her as sentiment, as distraction. Valentino's expression didn't change. "My father also valued loyalty," he replied, "which is why betrayal concerns me." DeSantis' smile thinned slightly. "Careful with accusations." Isabella spoke before Valentino could respond. "My father was loyal." The statement wasn't emotional, it was factual. DeSantis studied her more closely now. "Your father made decisions that conflicted with long-term strategy, or threatened someone else's ambition," she countered smoothly. The room cooled perceptibly. DeSantis' pleasant mask slipped just enough to reveal calculation. "You're reopening wounds that protected this empire," he said quietly. Valentino leaned forward slightly. "Protection built on lies collapses." A faint silence followed. For the first time, DeSantis didn't immediately respond. Instead, he shifted tactics. "Even if you prove misconduct," he said calmly, "what then? Public scandal, internal fracture, you risk weakening everything." Valentino didn't hesitate. "Then we rebuild stronger." Isabella felt something steady anchor inside her at his words. This wasn't just about her father anymore. It was about integrity in a world built on shadows. DeSantis finally stood, signaling the meeting's end. "You have ambition," he said to Valentino, "but ambition without caution invites ruin." His gaze shifted briefly to Isabella. "And trust," he added pointedly, "is a liability." Valentino rose as well. "Not when it's earned." The statement lingered between them like a challenge accepted. As they exited the building, reporters outside glanced curiously at the unexpected meeting but received no statements. Inside the car, silence wrapped around them for several seconds before Isabella exhaled slowly. "He's not afraid," she said. Valentino looked out the window, thoughtful. "Not yet." She turned toward him. "Will he be?" A faint, controlled smile touched his lips. "He will be when he realizes he miscalculated one thing." "What's that?" she asked quietly. Valentino met her eyes fully. "He thought dividing us would weaken me." His voice lowered slightly, carrying quiet certainty. "Instead, he united us." Isabella felt the weight of that truth settle between them, not as strategy, but as something deeper. And somewhere high above the city, Marco DeSantis stood alone in his glass office, watching their car disappear into traffic, realizing that for the first time in 20 years, the narrative he had carefully constructed was beginning to fracture. The days following the meeting with Marco DeSantis unfolded with a quiet intensity that felt like the calm before a decisive storm. Valentino did not retaliate recklessly, and that alone unsettled DeSantis more than any public confrontation could have. Instead of aggression, Valentino chose exposure, but precise exposure. Internal audits were finalized, encrypted archives restored, and long-buried financial backups recovered through legacy servers no one had accessed in decades. Isabella worked beside him through every late night, reviewing timestamps, digital signatures, transaction trails that had once seemed insignificant but now aligned like pieces of a concealed blueprint. The breakthrough came unexpectedly at 3 in the morning, when a recovered archive revealed an internal memo sent 20 years earlier from Marco DeSantis to Adrian Keller, just days before the Romano audit concluded. The memo referenced necessary narrative adjustments and ensuring unanimous confidence in leadership decisions. It wasn't a confession, but it was enough to connect intent to action. Isabella stared at the screen, her breath steady but her heart racing. "This is it," she whispered. Valentino didn't celebrate. He simply nodded once. "It's enough." Rather than leak the evidence publicly, Valentino called for a private assembly of the senior council, the few remaining figures who had served under his father and still carried weight in the organization's legacy structure. The meeting was held in the same grand hall where alliances had once been forged and rivalries buried. This time, Isabella stood openly at Valentino's side. No longer hidden, no longer an outsider. The room filled with seasoned faces, men who had once trusted Marco DeSantis without question. When Valentino began speaking, his tone was calm but resolute. He presented the recovered memo, the financial overlaps, the timeline of Keller's sudden rise. He did not dramatize. He did not accuse recklessly. He simply laid out the truth piece by piece until silence thickened in the room. Murmurs followed. Doubt cracked through long-standing loyalty. One elder member finally spoke. "If this is accurate," he said carefully, "then Romano was removed unjustly." Isabella held her composure, but emotion pressed at her chest. Valentino's gaze remained steady. And decisions made under manipulation weaken leadership at its core, he added. Marco de Santis was invited to respond that same evening. He entered the hall with his usual composure, but the atmosphere had shifted. The subtle deference he once commanded was replaced by scrutiny. Valentino presented the evidence directly, this time without negotiation. De Santis examined the documents longer than before. For the first time, his silence lingered too long. "Strategic decisions require discretion," he said finally. "Your father trusted my judgment." Valentino stepped closer, his voice low but unwavering. "He trusted your honesty." The distinction cut deeper than accusation. Isabella watched De Santis carefully. The arrogance that once shielded him was thinning, replaced by calculation turning toward damage control. "Even if errors were made," De Santis replied, "exposing them now destabilizes everything your father built." Valentino's answer came without hesitation. "Then we rebuild it on truth." The council deliberated privately for over an hour. Isabella waited beside Valentino in a quiet corridor, the weight of 20 years pressing against this single decision. She thought of her father, his silence, his resignation, the way he had carried disgrace without defense to protect her from deeper conflict. "Whatever happens," she said softly, "thank you." Valentino turned to her, surprised by the vulnerability in her tone. "For what?" "For not choosing the easy path." His expression softened slightly. "Power isn't about easy paths." A faint pause lingered between them before he added, more quietly, "It's about choosing the right one." When the council finally returned, their verdict was measured but firm. Marco de Santis was stripped of remaining influence within the organization, his financial networks severed from core operations, his advisory privileges revoked permanently. It wasn't a dramatic downfall. It was something more final, irrelevance. De Santis did not protest publicly. He understood defeat when he saw it. As he exited the estate that night, he paused only once, glancing back at Valentino and Isabella standing together beneath the archway lights. There was no apology in his eyes, but there was acknowledgement. The narrative he had constructed 2 decades ago had finally collapsed, and it had collapsed because the son of the man he once advised chose transparency over preservation. In the weeks that followed, Valentino made a decision that surprised many within his circle. He restored the Romano name publicly, not as a symbolic gesture, but as a formal correction. An official statement was issued acknowledging financial misrepresentation during the audit period and clearing the Romano legacy of misconduct. The announcement was handled with precision, framed as a commitment to structural integrity moving forward. When Isabella brought a printed copy of the statement to her father, his hands trembled as he read it. For the first time in 20 years, the weight in his eyes lifted. He didn't speak much. He didn't need to. The silence between father and daughter was filled with something stronger than words: restoration. Back at the estate, life settled into a different rhythm. The tension that had once defined Isabella and Valentino's connection had transformed into something steadier. They still challenged one another, still questioned, but now there was foundation beneath it. One evening, standing once again on the balcony overlooking the city, Valentino leaned against the railing beside her. The skyline shimmered quietly, unaware of the history rewritten within it. "When you first walked into my club," he said thoughtfully, "I thought you were reckless." Isabella smiled faintly. "And now," he looked at her fully, "now I think you were necessary." The admission carried more than admiration. It carried respect. She studied him carefully, remembering the first question he had ever asked her. "Do I scare you?" He had whispered that night, certain fear defined him. She stepped closer now, her voice softer but certain. "You asked me once if you scared me." A faint, familiar curve touched his lips. "Yes," she met his gaze steadily. "You don't." The words held new meaning now, not defiance, not challenge, but understanding. Valentino's expression shifted subtly. "And you," he replied quietly, "don't unsettle me anymore." Isabella tilted her head slightly. "That sounds disappointing." A rare, genuine laugh escaped him. "It's not." He paused, then added with quiet honesty, "You changed the way I lead." The confession was not grand. It was real. Below them, the city pulsed with life, unaware that 2 legacies had just rewritten their futures. The empire Valentino inherited no longer rested on unquestioned tradition, but on conscious choice. And Isabella, who had walked into his world seeking truth, had found not only justice for her father but a partnership forged in fire and integrity. The fear that once defined his name had evolved into something stronger, respect earned, not demanded. As the night breeze moved gently around them, Valentino glanced at her one more time. "If I asked you again," he said softly, "would your answer change?" Isabella smiled, her eyes steady and warm. "No," she replied. And this time, the absence of fear wasn't a challenge, it was trust.